The Game of Zen explores the often overlooked ways in which professional, personal, and spiritual growth are interrelated. We dive deep into the life teachings of the Buddha and the mindfulness practices of Zen, revealing how they can help us dramatically expand our possibilities for wholehearted work, life, and play.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Game of Zen podcast. My name is Scott Berman, checking in from Philadelphia, PA. As always, joined by my good buddy Paul from Boulder. What's new? How you doing, Paul?
Hey, Scott. Doing good. Doing good. We're just after Memorial Day and getting the summer going, and things are going really well. I'm happy to introduce a little special episode we have here for our listeners.
Yeah, so today we're going to have a special episode. Paul did an interview with a good friend of his, and he will give you a little intro, and then we'll dive right into that.
Yeah, it's a first time for us, Scott, here, to pull in another event, into our Game of Zen. But I think our listeners will really like this one. Eric Zimmer is the host of a very popular podcast called The One You Feed, and it is about habit change and spiritual habit change. And he has a new book out that came out just about a month and a half ago called How a Little Becomes a Lot, The Art of Small Changes for a More Meaningful Life. And it combines the science of habit change and behavioral change with the process of spiritual development and self-transformation. And it's a really unique kind of perspective on spiritual development and spiritual practice. I've known Eric for a number of years. He was my formal Zen student for a number of years, and he's had me as a guest on his podcast. And as part of his book tour for the release of his book, he traveled to Boulder from his home in Columbus, Ohio, and I hosted a book signing and a conversation with him at the Shambhala Center in downtown Boulder here about a month and a half ago. And it was a really great event. We had about 50 people attend. And it's a really interesting, I think, conversation about spiritual practice and the process of spiritual practice and what's going on with it and how to integrate it into a daily life and lifestyle in a way that really produces effects, meaningful effects in your life. So I hope you enjoy it. We're going to share it with you now. Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this auspicious event. My name is Paul Gyodo Gaspinelli Sensei. I'm a Zen teacher here in town. I run the Eon Zen Center, and we actually sit every week in this room on Monday evenings, and we practice Zen. I've known Eric for 7-8 years, perhaps, something like that. And I want to welcome you. I guess I'll start out by saying welcome you to this book discussion with Eric.
Yes, thank you all.
And his new book. We need a copy of the book up here. Getting to you. Start with the show. Oh, thank you.
We got it.
Yeah, we should see how Eric's new book, wonderful book. How a Little Becomes a Lot. I had to work out exactly how it reads. They were quite inventively designed. How a Little Becomes a Lot, Here Are Small Changes for a More Meaningful Life. It's a really beautiful, wonderful book. And I'm really happy and honored to have Eric here to share his wisdom and his process with us here in Boulder. I've known Eric about 7 or 8 years, I think it was. Eric reached out from his place in Columbus, interested in practicing Zen, talking about Zen, and entered into becoming my student for a couple of years, and we practiced formal Zen together. Eric's podcast, many of you may know him from, The One You Feed, which is a very popular podcast and has been for many years. And he's been the host of many great teachers and scholars and thinkers and writers in the area generally, I would say, of kind of maybe behavioral health as it intersects with spiritual development. Maybe that's the way I would describe it. Eric can describe more as he goes it. But Eric's book came out recently, and he reached out to put together an event like this that we could have a discussion where we share his process and his learnings and teachings from the book, and with a little bit of me as a kind of a flintstone with my Zen practice and teachings, and that's a part of his spiritual consciousness as well. So there may be some interesting connections, that we can bring forth for you. So we plan to talk for about 35 or 40 minutes, and then there'll be time for Q&A. And I hope everybody has some interesting questions to ask Eric at that point. So welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, well, I want to start off by saying, asking you what inspired you to write the book, and say a little bit about how it came to be. You've been doing the podcast for quite a long time. You've been in this world for a long time. Has something motivated you to put this together into a narrative form and into this book form? So we'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I think I've been interested in why and how people change for a long time, originally to save my own life. And then as I watched people around me, I'd see some people that were able to make the change. I was in Hagged back in the day, so that's what I'm referring to. We may get to that. I'd see some people able to get sober, and I'd see other people not. I'd see friends of mine die, and I'd be, why can I do it? And then in my own life, as I went on, I wondered why sometimes does it seem like I can exercise regularly and stick with it, and other times, no matter what I do, I fail. Or why sometimes am I really productive at work, and other times I procrastinate all the time? Why? And so when I started asking, or when I started doing the podcast, amazingly 12 years ago, that was a question that I've been asking people for quite some time. And then I started doing coaching work with hundreds of people from around the world. I started leading programs that many of the people in this room have been through. And we continued to explore those questions. And I continued to ask that question. And I felt like I finally was at a point with the book where I had some of the answers to that. I do think there's a mystery that sits at the center. There is something indefinable that anybody, even the people who study behavioral health and study addiction, will say there's still, we don't fully know, but we know a lot of it. And this book was my attempt to put all of that together into a portable way for people to learn some of those skills.
Very good. Yeah, so it seems something kind of crystallized for you in your understanding, and you put something together. I'm wondering also if there's a sense that there's something in the culture right now, in the broader community of our culture, that is calling out for something like this, something about meaning, creating a meaningful life, and how to do that.
I think we are in a bit of a crisis of meaning. I think everybody feels it to a certain degree. Why are we doing all this? What's the point of all this? And so when I looked at what was out there, what I saw was a lot of great books that have come out in the last few years that have done very well for about habits. How do we build habits? And those books have sold 1 trillion copies because people are very interested in that. And there's a lot of great information in that now, in those books, and I share a lot of it in this book. But there's a second component that I was looking at all along, which is like, how can we take the science of behavior change, not just to help us build an exercise habit or to eat better, all of which are really important things. I'm not saying they're not, but how do we use them to become wiser, happier, more fulfilled people? Can those principles apply in other domains? And so this book was really an attempt to integrate those different fields together.
Yeah, really, really powerful. And that is something that sets your book off from a lot of those other books that are out there in habit change. And I'm sure everybody here is familiar with what those are. I want to say right here, I love this book. This book is so, so good. And I'm a pretty tough critic, written work like this, these teachings. But Eric, I think, in an incredibly engaging as well as deep and wise way, did what he just said, which was to combine the the science, you could say, and the lived wisdom of habit change with what are deeper spiritual questions, I think, about meaning and about identity. You say early in the book that the book addresses itself to two questions. What do I want to do? And who do I want to be? Yeah. So for me, that dual focus is what elevates your book above a lot of the other books that are really just about behavior change, because that who do I want to be is a spiritual question. Who am I and who do I want to be? So how do you see the relationship between those questions?
Ultimately, they are two lanes on the same road, right? The way we behave is driven by who we are, and who we are is driven by the way we behave. You can't separate the two. You can do all of the spiritual practice or meditation or positive thinking that you want to do. But if we're not behaving in a way that feels right to us, we are not going to feel good inside. You can't get around that. When I was in my addiction, it wouldn't have mattered how much work I did, quote unquote, on who I was if I wasn't also able to stop doing the awful things that I was doing. They came together, and then behavior is also informs who we are inside. We feel, as we behave in ways that we feel good about, there's an inner alignment we feel in integrity in ourselves. And so they both have to be there. And if we want to talk about lasting and meaningful change addresses both of those things. It addresses behavior, but it also addresses thoughts. It addresses how I work with my emotions. It all has to kind of come together.
Yeah, one thing came to me as I was reading those early chapters of your book, when you talk about how intrinsic the question of ground in my own identity is to be the ground of your behavior change. And I had tapped into, I think it was the Atomic Habits book, Jim Splirbus, who mentioned the success that the studies showed that the people who were most successful in quitting smoking, for example, were those who were able to identify as a non-smoker. Okay. And as a Zen teacher, I thought, right on, that's exactly what Eric is talking about. But then there was no guidance around that part of it. There's just visualize yourself as a non-smoker, or take it till you make it that you're a non-smoker. And I think the beauty and the depth of what you've done here is actually integrating a process of learning who you are and who you want to be into this as part of the process, not as like a gimmick. So maybe you can say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really true. That when we identify as a certain way, we're more likely to behave that way. And if I'm smoking cigarettes all the time and I keep trying to smoke cigarettes and I keep smoking them, I can't really BS myself to say, well, I'm a non-smoker, because I don't believe it. And so one of the core ideas in the book of how a little becomes a lot is that if we can start taking small actions that we can achieve, and we could talk about what little by little means, that what happens is that if we do that and we succeed, we begin to grow confidence. We begin to believe in ourselves again. Because one of the biggest problems with our attempts to change things in life, there's two big problems. One is, like, let's just take eating right. You go to the doctor, your doctor says your cholesterol is a disaster, you need to eat better. And if you don't, there's one problem. Problem is your cholesterol does not get better. That's a problem. But there's a deeper problem. The deeper problem is that when we keep saying we're going to do something and then we don't do it, it begins to erode our very faith in ourselves, in our ability to be the authors of our own lives, of our belief that we can make things happen in them. And so I call them the stakes of change, are actually kind of high, right? That both those things are really important. And so the little by little approach is let's start where you are, where you can succeed. Because when we succeed at doing something, we feel better about ourselves. And the science is very clear. Motivation goes up when we feel good about ourselves and our chances of success. And it goes down when we feel bad about ourselves and our chances of success. So by doing things that we can succeed at and noticing that, we become more motivated, we become able to do more, and we start to then be able to say, oh, look, I'm the person who can make and keep promises to themselves.
Yeah. This question of motivation you dig into quite a bit, and you bring in the idea of, I think it's complex, motivational complexity. Here it is, right? So you talk about motivational complexity and understanding our motivation in terms of values and desires. So I'm gonna give a few quotes from your book here because I think this is really interesting and insightful. And in talking about values and desires and not needs, you were expressly moving away from the language of needs that we get from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is often talked about in terms of what is motivating us, right? But you go to values and desires, which I think was really brilliant here. And you say, I'm quoting here, values are the things we've decided are worth wanting. Desires are what we want, whether we like it or not. Values are what we want most, while desires are what we want now. Yeah, chuckles of recognition for that. So I find this part of the book really insightful and helpful. And you talk about conflicts between values and desires, which I think in some ways, and you talk about it this way, is pretty easy to understand which one is a value and which is a desire. Of a value to be healthy, but I have a desire to eat that chocolate cake. Okay, it's kind of a clear conflict right there. And there's ways of working with that. But what you really, I think, astutely point out is that a deeper and more challenging conflict to work with is when values are in conflict with each other.
Yeah.
Right. And those tend to be subconscious. So you talk about, let's see, I'll say a little bit more quote from you. Value-based conflicts, unlike desire versus value conflicts, can't be resolved in the moment. The only way to lessen how often and how severely you find your values in conflict is to get greater clarity about what you actually really want most of the time. So for me as a Zen teacher, this was a really key insight, and it reflects on what Zen practice is all about, which is really about resolving a lot of the internal conflicts that we have in our life, recognizing that we have parts of ourselves that are often in conflict, competition, self-criticism towards each other. So Zen, we often say, is about, and any real deep spiritual practice is in some ways about getting out of our own way and then allowing us to become active participants in the universe instead of getting in our own way, choking ourselves out, cutting ourselves, and sabotaging ourselves in the ways that we're so used to doing. So how did you maybe come about recognizing these things about values conflict, maybe in your own process of discovering your own values and working with conflicts, and how you help others clarify their values?
I think if I was to write that again, I would probably state even more that there is no getting out of values to values conflicts. I don't think they go away if they're true values, right? If you reflect on what's important to you, and there's a lot of ways to do that in a book, certain things that you might have thought were important, you might fall away. And yet, I know in my own life, I have lots of existing values to values conflicts that I don't see going away. The example I give of this is I have a value that I've learned through an exercise in this book that is one of valuing, I just call it adventure. It just means that I feel most deeply, truly myself and happiest and most content when I'm sort of in a situation that I don't fully know what I'm doing, for lack of a better word. So it's important to me. And in the Zen work that I have done with you and that I've continued to do, there is a deep value on being right where you are and content with exactly what is. These two things do not sit next to each other very comfortably, right? Because my adventure is always saying, go do that, we should go do that, let's get out of here, let's go. And then my contentment was like, hey, settle down. Like it's cool right here. Those two pull at each other. I think the one that many, many people will recognize is the family and work values conflict. If you care about your career and you care about your family, there is very often a pull. And that pull doesn't resolve. It's not been my experience. But by being conscious that that's what's happening, and partially by going, okay, that's good. Those are both important to me. Those are both going to be there. There's going to be this tension. I can relax into it. And when we relax into it, I think we can be more conscious about what we're choosing when and for what reasons.
That was the key thing I was looking for. Is like, what do you do in that situation? So what do you do? Maybe you can state it.
I think there's an insight that I had years ago around work-life balance. Like everybody talks about work-life balance, and I know why, because you want it. And we want, ideally, someone would say, Paul, 36 hours at work will be enough. 4 hours of volunteer time would be good. Spend 2 hours with your mother, and the rest you could spend with your kids. And voila, here you go. Just do it. And of course, nobody can hand that to you because yours is going to be completely different and it's going to change week to week. And so what I realized with these sort of conflicts is how over time is it looking at? If I look at it on a week basis, there might be, let's look at it a 3-month basis. For the last 3 months, I've been hyper focused on one, and that's getting this, mostly focused on getting this book out into the world. So that has meant that lots of other things have just simply gotten like, not now, not now, not now. And now that season is wrapping up, and it's time to come back into a more full version of myself that brings all those different pieces in. And so 1 week you might be you have a lot going on at work, so you spend a lot of time at work and the kids don't get a lot of attention. There might be another week that the kids are sick and you're home all week and you don't do anything. But over time, we start to go, okay, how are the things that matter to me in my life? How are they coming together? Are they getting the appropriate attention? And again, I don't want to make it sound like it becomes easy, but I do think it becomes a lot more workable, and the internal pressure can go down. And internal pressure does not cause us generally to make the best decisions about what's important to us. We react to that. Mm-hmm. And what we really want to be doing is contemplating and responding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the most important thing, isn't it? Is to recognize the conflict is there. Yeah. Because oftentimes it's unacknowledged and conscious, and that's where it produces the distortion.
Yes.
But to see it there, and then you took it to the next step, which was choice. You said the word choice, and then you choose what is you want to do, right? And I'll say, I do work in my coaching capacity. I do a Zen reflected coaching work that I do, as you know, and I talk about the 3 contracts in life: our sacred contracts with ourselves, with others, our partnering, with our work, all of them sacred contracts. And then I have people express their vows and their values in each of those areas. And then, okay, what happens when there's a conflict between these? Okay. And I think the tendency potentially for some people, particularly if they do have a spiritual background, might be, well, I'm going to meditate on this. I'm just going to sit here and the answer is going to pop up for me. And it might that actually does happen, maybe 50 or more % of the time that does happen. But when it comes down to it, it's a choice. Okay? And that's a big part of your book that I took a lot of value from. You say early in the book that this is about the million tiny opportunities for choice and change. And those are two powerful words that don't mean the same thing. They're both very unique. This resonated with me a lot because as we understand karma in Buddhist tradition, karma is created by volitional action. That means choice. Every time that you make a choice, you're creating karma, positive or negative. How many little choices are you making in the course of a day? Thousands, right? Where to go, how to move, where to breathe, who do you talk to, how to speak to them. Thousands of these choices. Karma is being created with each of those. And what we do in meditation, and this goes back to the foundational teachings of Buddha, is just your basic mindfulness practice of choosing to bring your attention right back to your breath is creating positive karma, which is also creating a habit of agency around your own body and mind. So you're cultivating a certain state. So it's doing exactly this.
Can I ask you a question?
You please do.
So much of what occurs for us is happening on a habitual, unconscious level. So are those considered volitional choices, or are those previous karma playing out? I mean, I may make a volitional choice in how I talk to so and so or how I read so and so, but I may just be operating on autopilot, which is what a lot of us do, and it's not always bad, right? It's a great human capacity that we don't have to contemplate deeply every single thing all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to claim to be the super expert on this. It's very deep stuff. But I said that the formal Buddhist Dharma is that it has to be volitional. Okay. That subconscious stuff isn't technically creating karma. But I would introduce a great, humility around the gray area of that.
Yeah.
What's conscious and what isn't conscious.
Yes, very much a gray area.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do you see it that way too? And I think that comes through is that there's a great empowerment in your book to bring up this point of choice, that you really want to empower people with what is how consequential it is your choices are.
Without freaking people out. Like, I mean, if you literally think that like every last little thing I'm doing,
Yeah.
right, that can become overwhelming. But the more often we can choose consciously, the better.
Yeah.
For sure. But I think choice is a really interesting thing. I think a lot about there's all the free will debates. Do we have any free will or not? And I saying that either of those are too one-sided for me. I think that the answer is it's a lot more nuanced than that. So the example I'll give is that 30 years ago, I felt like I had almost no choice in doing it, right? I remember there's a story I tell in the book of I'm a week sober, and I've decided like, this is it. This time I am going to do it. I weigh 100 pounds. I have hepatitis C. I'm looking at going to jail for a long time. I'm in a really bad state. So I go to treatment, go into this program. I'm going to do this. Got to do it. I got to do it. I see it. Going to do it. And then I go to a Zimmer family Christmas party. My grandfather says, here's your gift. He hands me an envelope. In it is $25, which is the magic number that it takes to go get high in that day. And instantly that voice that I wish wasn't there starts just screaming at me. And I resist it for a little while. And but not very long, call my dealer and I get in the car. And I remember this. I snuck my mom's car out of the garage. It was snowing. It was Christmas Eve. Aerosmith's Dream On was playing on the radio. And I'm sobbing because I so badly don't want to do it. And yet, I absolutely can't not do it. So how much choice did I have then? What was the choice that I had? The choice I have today is very, very different. It's completely different. I tell another story in the book, in that same chapter, later on, where I go every week and I go to the pharmacy and I give them the little thing. They give me the little paper sack with a the stapled prescription, the too long receipt, and I bring them to my mom up to her apartment. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about opiates. I'm talking about Oxycontin, like the good stuff, right? 30 years ago, I might have robbed you at gunpoint. And now I drive it to my mom's. I don't even think, it takes me weeks before I even think about the fact like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing that. That's unbelievable. So I have so much more choice now. So I do think choice is nuanced. But I do think that part of what I hope I give people in the book is how can we make better choices? How can we move so that we're less of the feeling like a malevolent hand is driving us around and more of I'm just in the car choosing the things that I want to choose are important. And so choices I think a lot about. And I don't have great answers, but I do think we can all get more and more choice, have greater degrees of, I don't like the word control, but that's a word we all understand, have more control over what I do and what I'll prioritize.
Yeah. And you feel the choices kind of develop momentum. The more you develop your agency in making choices, they permeate forward into your own future. And then do you also feel they permeate outward to other people too? And I was reminded in reading this part of your book about the Jataka tale, which is the tales of the previous lives of the Buddha when he was lived on earth as animals. They're tales of animals. They kind of soft fables. It's about previous lives of the Buddhas. And there's one where there's a forest fire in the forest and all the animals go running away from the fire, except for one tiny little bird who goes down to the river and picks up a little thimble full of water in its beak and flies over the fire and drops it and then goes back. And all the animals were really smart back in those days. They're even smarter now, but they did communicate. They're looking at, the tiny little bird going, "You're crazy. What the heck are you doing?" So I'm doing what I can. And you might know the story. They all do what they can and they all get the water and they end up putting out the forest fire. So I wonder if there's something like that you've observed, you sense, or to be the case in terms of all the little choices that we make.
Yeah, some of you that have taken the spiritual habits course might recognize that little story about the bird that 'cause I talk about it in the section on generosity. That this bird just does what it can. I do think one of the biggest factors in our ability to make change, and thusly in everyone's ability to make change, is the support of other people. I don't think it is arguably the most important thing. The science is pretty clear on if you have people who support you in any degree in a change you're trying to make, you're much more likely to make it. My own experience bears that out. I never would have gotten clean without recovery programs, without plus step. It's like they saved my life twice. And so, yes, I do think that the changes that we make can inspire others. I was talking about this the other day. I was at the treatment center where this book starts, and I've been giving people have been buying books, extra books. I've been donating it back in this treatment center. And I was talking about how in the beginning I had to borrow hope because I didn't have any of myself. I had zero faith in my ability to do this because I had tried it a whole bunch of different times and it hadn't worked. So I had to borrow hope in the beginning. So it was the people who were making the change that I was watching that were really the engines of me being able to change. And I think we're all that way. And I think that we all have way more effect on the world than we think. The tiny little things that we do, the kindness you show someone could radiate out in 100 ways that you never see. Like, I wish we could see it some of the time, right? I wish we could see more of it, where you go like, oh, I was kind to that. There's a story that I also told in this spiritual habits program, and it came from a coaching client. We were talking about generosity, and she told this story about going to the grocery. And she always got in this one person's line because the person just whipped people through. They were fast. And the way they did that is they just were not the slightest bit friendly to anyone. So she decided when she got up there that time, she said, I always get in your line because you just are so efficient. You know, you get everybody through. And she said this person that she had been, seen for months, years, never smiled once, just lights it. And the person says, would you go tell me? So she goes over and she tells the boss, and her boss lights up. And he goes, oh, and you know what? Like, we've been looking for employee of the month. So we went up to her, right? Do you think that when she went home that night and when he went home that night, they were better, their families? Like, we just don't see that. And so, yes, I think that our ability to influence other people in change, in hope, in anything is very profound.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. And such deep Dharma.
Interconnection, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And, we're at the time when we wanted to open it up for questions. So, let me, maybe we'll just open it up for questions. We do have a, here.
How much time do we have? You folks better have a question. Or I'm going to start reading and know he wants that.
Anything that is where in brain chemistry, medication, and all of this would go, where does that fit for you?
I think that the question was brain chemistry, medication, all of that. I mean, on some level, we're just a big bag of chemicals, right? I mean, that's one reductive view of it, but it's not an entirely incorrect view that I talk a lot in the book about my dealings with depression over the years, and medication is absolutely part of it. I think that the choices we make and the behaviors that we do affect our emotions. There's a lot of ways. If ultimately we could say how you feel is brain chemistry, and I think in my opinion, that's accurate. There's a lot of levers to pull for brain chemistry. One is the lever that you simply take a drug and it changes your brain chemistry, and those can be very valuable. Exercise changes your brain chemistry. Conversations with friends changes your brain chemistry. Reading a good book changes your brain chemistry. Meditating changes your brain chemistry. Being grateful changes your brain chemistry. So I would never feel like I had the answer for another person on the best ways for them to change theirs. I figured out over time what mine are. And I think it's generally a good thing to say, the way I approach it is, how many non-medical levers can I pull? But the cool thing about depression, which is what I felt with, is that there's a phrase I love, which is depression hates a moving target. And what does depression make it hardest to do? To move at all, right? So, I have friends who have suffered such deep clinical depression that the only thing that has saved their lives is medication or all kinds of different treatments. They would never have gotten to the point that they could exercise without that. So everybody's different. And so, yeah, that's my answer. Is that helpful at all? I hope. It's a big question.
It's just out there, chemicals being used for so many different things.
Yes.
It's really complicated. But I like what you said about if you can't get to a place where you can actually move.
Yeah, it's very complicated, and it's incredibly frustratingly and can be maddening to know what works for what situation. It really is. It's hard. I think that when we start to think about questions of like, what treatment should I do? Or what should I do? Those are the kind of questions that I say that I think fall under the category of discernment, meaning they're hard questions. And my experience is that discernment happens best in community, meaning we got to talk. And by community, I don't mean like we have to get everybody in this room. Let's have a conversation about medication. You might all have opinions, probably my mom and sister in particular. Maybe my girlfriend also has a partner, Jenny has a stronger opinion, but other people, talking to other people is how I try and work out those difficult things. And yeah, there's a lot of opinions.
So I think since they said something about in the book, who do I want to be and what do I want to do? And I often think about like, who do I want to be? Like maybe a woman of dignity or cultivating harmony. And especially if I'm not exactly feeling very skillful at the thing I want to be, I'm not sure how to figure out the doing or the habit of the doing. And I just wonder.
The question, if I understand it, is I might know who the person I want to be is. I might have some vision of that, but I'm not quite sure what actions to take to get there. Or I'm trying to take actions in that direction and it doesn't seem to be working, or both.
It's like, what is the little thing to think about that I could do to create a pattern then to become congruent with a harmonious person or
Ah.
woman?
Yeah. So I think that when we talk about the way that we relate to the world, which is what being harmonious or dignified is to a certain degree, we are talking to a certain degree about changing thought patterns. We're changing those. And in the book, I've got a method for kind of how we do that. But my approach is always the same. It's not it's the little things that we do on the way towards dignity that matter, right? It's not that there's a final stage of dignity that we ever get to. It's like, there's a phrase we used to use in recovery all the time, which is do the next right thing. I don't love that. I love that phrase, except I don't love the, like, as in if there is one right thing to do and I must figure out that. I much more like do a good thing. What's the next good thing that I can do from the situation that I'm in that moves me in some way towards who I want to be, where I want to be? What is that thing? And surprisingly, you can live an entire life that way. It's sort of like driving a car with headlights. You could drive 3,000 miles in the dark. Your headlights never see more than about 8 feet ahead of you. Right? So we never see all the steps, particularly in something like that. If we're talking about like, oh, how do I start a business, or how do I get better at guitar, or like you can plot out the steps, right? I mean, you can manage a project. You can go, oh, construction needs to be all these different things. But things like that, it's almost more always how does a dignified person respond to this situation that you don't know is coming? Right? So that's how I simplify that.
Okay, while you're getting it, and especially going out of the way on that too, it's a really good question, I think it's, and not only does it invite you to have that be an inquiry, a constant inquiry, because it is such a good question. I want to be a dignified person. What would a dignified person do in this situation? So you explore that. So there's a little bit of a, what would Jesus do, or what would Buddha do inquiry, which I think is really valuable actually. But ultimately it gets to what would I want to do as a dignified person, because it is very unique to your own place and space, right? So you're actually not only learning about yourself and you're learning about what a dignified person would do, you're learning about dignity itself. What actually is this thing that appears to us as an ideal in the beginning? I want to be like that, but as a lived equality, It's something deeper and richer and more emeritus. So
I was introduced to your book from listening to your podcast or with Laura Tom.
Mm.
And I don't exactly, and I had not gotten part in there to maybe it's addressed this, and I probably not getting this right, but it was, I think, around your practice of a mnemonic it was the phrase, when I do this, now that, something along those lines. And I think I'd love to hear a little more now about that because when I think about uh, changing a habit, any kind of habit, how do you, absolutely reminder where I don't sticking with all the minutes or whenever it is would be very helpful. So that phrase really struck something with that one.
When this, then that.
When it's then that, that's it.
Yeah. So I think that I use it in two ways in the book. So I'll address both of them real quick. One is simply this: when it comes to making any sort of change in our behavior, planning is really important. And I go into all the steps to do that in the book. There's a real structural element to change. What am I going to change? How am I going to change it? Specificity. And then once you do all of that, I have an exercise in there of like, what will go wrong? So when X happens, what will I do? So the example I use is, let's say you're like, all right, I'm going to work on my novel every day after the kids get on the school bus. So if you were my coaching client, we work through that and I go, oh, that's great. That's good. Good. And then, okay, I'd ask you, what ways will this fail? And you would say, well, I mean, maybe the kids won't go to school. And I'll go, probably not. Right. So now what? What are we going to do on the day that the kids don't go to school? What are we going to do when X happens? Now, you can't plan for every scenario, but you can plan for a lot. You can plan for the obvious ones. The second part that I talk about in the book is this idea. I talk about retraining thought patterns, and I call it still points. And a still point is a moment that it's a small moment that you do some small reflection or practice. If you want to change the way you think about something, you may know what you want. Okay, this is the thought pattern I have. I prefer it to be this. You're going to have to interrupt it 20,000 times for it to change. And so what still points they are when then moments. They are using something like, when I go to the bathroom, then I will reflect on patience. Because that gives you enough opportunities, right? If you drink as much water as I do at this age, right, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to reflect on patience for just a minute. And if you do that often, it starts to change the thought pattern. So, for example, if you are trying to be more patient with your kids and you're like, okay, I want to do that. If you 5 times a day, every day for 30 seconds, think about why is it important that I'm patient with my kids? And you just do that reflection, we're much more likely when we go home that night to be patient with our children than if we thought about it a week ago. So that's the other way in which I use when then, is to create these moments of intentional reflection and practice. And you can use anything. You can use an alarm on your phone. We created an app where it goes off multiple times a day randomly and displays whatever message you want it to display. That's a when. The when is when my phone goes ding and I pick it up and I reflect. So those are the two ways I use that. Does that help? No. Oh, here we go.
How'd she feel so small?
Well, there are perhaps many answers to that, but one, and maybe the most, is that you taught me to learn to read. It's through reading that I was exposed to and saw things that I didn't know about and that I learned about. And I never would have had that if you hadn't taught.
Good job.
Thank you.
Well, the Italian person values have been really present for me.
Mhm.
I really appreciate the vocabulary made on it. It's like it's quotidian for me, just like planning. It's like I have 2 hours left in my day, and I value being in touch with my friends. And I really should get back to this friend and start reading Marvel. And then I really value reading, like cherish a lot of experience, supports me, and it increases my empathy. And I value my health as far as probably having healthy dinner instead of shoving whatever in my face, right?
Yep.
And that's consistent and frequent, that there is not enough time to honor all my values in the way I would like. And so then, I like what you said about with time horizons, where you accept that on any given day, I can do it all, but maybe over time, your sun balance. But my break is like, well, like I want to do all these things now. And so, um, I invite more tools for working with the dis-ease of it's a little bit of a racy internal mind state of like, so maybe breaths were the answer, but sort of it's a racy mind state of I want to do all these are all negatives. The friendship, the reading, the healthy eating. So working that.
Are you conscious of that in that moment? Are you like, okay, I have 3 things that I value that I want to do. I can't do all of them.
I have 2 hours and finite amount of energy I really value.
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so I'll answer that on 2 levels. The first would not be emotionally, it would be practical, which would be that I often talk about separating decision from action. And what I mean by that is that when we're trying to figure out what to do and then do it at the same time, that takes a lot of there's a lot of mental turmoil in that. And often what'll happen is we won't do any of it in that case. So the cure for that is you decide ahead of time, here's how I'm going to spend my time. There's a looking at your week ahead and going, okay, you know what? Tuesday nights are X. Tuesday nights are reading nights. Thursday nights are this, and right, and we lay it out. And of course, it's going to change. Of course, but there are standard things. Like the only way that I stay in contact with certain friends is by like almost intentionally being like, we're going to try every Wednesday to do this thing. So deciding ahead of time can take some of it out of that. Because in the moment you just go, all right, I'm going to do what the plan says I'm going to do. And the plan is, I often think about like we have a wisest, best version of ourselves. And that is the version that is not in the moment, that is not caught up, that is not tired, that is not frazzled, that sits back and goes, what's the best version of me do when? And decides it. So that can be really I think the emotional aspect of it is a certain recognizing again that finitude is real and it is we don't like it and yet we have to accept it. And we simply I don't know when it happened, but I spent a lot of my life feeling incredibly frustrated that I would not be able to do all of the things that I wanted to do. And somewhere along the way, through Zen practice, through reflecting on finitude, all of that, that turned down a little bit. I won't say it's not there. Of course it's there. But the emotional intensity turned down a little bit. And I went, of course I want to do more when there's time. And, I do my best, but also then, and I suspect you've done this, right? Because you are able to identify those 3 things as values, right? But it's oftentimes the example I often give is that there was a period of time where I kept saying, I have got to be in a band again. got to be in a band again. And I was feeling really bad that I wasn't. And at one point I just stopped and I was like, hey, it's like I've traveled this amount for work. Am I going to change that? No. I'm launching this new podcast that matters to me. Am I going to not do that? Nope. So who's the odd man out here? It's that one. And for now, that one goes on the shelf. That one has to go on the shelf. The things you're talking about aren't, though, easily things that you can set on the shelf. But hopefully some of what I just said there is helpful in some way.
How do you think we're at time? We're at unless anyone has
one last question.
Okay.
My question is, how do you not make
The question is, how do you not make it too little? So what does little by little mean? So I actually thought a lot about this, and I came up with a definition of what I mean by little by little. And what I mean by little is low resistance actions done consistently over time in the same direction. So low resistance means you can get yourself to do it. Right? So my experience is almost always most people, the problem is not that they make it too little, it's that they make it too big. That's generally the case that most people go to. However, if it's too little, what I would say is the way I would calibrate this if I was working with somebody in a coaching capacity would be, I'd say, like, let's take our best guess. What do we think the size of this thing we're going to do is? And let's let the experiment run for a week. If at the end of the week, you're like, yeah, I did all that, that was easy. Then we go, let's make it bigger. If on the other end, you're like, well, I did it 3 out of 7 days, I'd say, okay, right? Maybe we're already too. So I think the key is that do I have consistency with the thing? And if I do, and there's a desire to, then you increase. And then you increase again. There's eventually a point where you'll hit where the consistency will fall apart, where you will be trying to do too much. And at that point, then it's all calibration. And we can talk more about it after. But we can have this because I sense there's a deeper question underneath that one that we don't quite have time to get to. So, but hopefully that's.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration into Zen Buddhism and its transformative influence on work and life. We hope you'll subscribe, share, and comment wherever you get your podcasts. May your journey be one of continuous growth and mindful living. From all of us here at Game of Zen, wishing you peace and prosperity on your path ahead.